Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ceres podcast. I'm Stelios and this is episode 231. Today I'm joined by Andrew Griffith MP. Andrew is a Member of Parliament for Arundel and South Downs and currently serves as the Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade. Before entering politics, he spent over 25 years in business, including time as Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer at Sky, where he helped grow the company from 3 to 30 million customers, and as Chairman of Just Eat, where he was named Non-Executive Director of the Year by the Sunday Times. Since being elected in 2019, Andrews held several ministerial roles, including Economic Secretary to the Treasury and Minister for Science, Innovation and Technology. He brings a rare mix of hands-on business experience and political insight, making him a key voice on the future of enterprise trade and growth in Britain. We cover a fair bit in this episode: VAT, business rates, employment law, high street, and how government can genuinely support small business. It's a fast-paced chat, but that's what happens when you've got a guest who understands both sides, business and policy, and also time restraints. What I did really appreciate was how open and thoughtful Andrew was throughout. He gave his time generously, given the situation, avoided cheap political shots, and focused instead on practical ideas and long-term solutions. I really do hope to have him back on again to continue the conversation. Today's episode is brought to you by Ceres Heavy Duty Cleaning Products. They are designed to keep your kitchen, fish and chip shop in spotless condition, safe and running efficiently. Our newest addition is the Ceres Heavy Duty Descaler. It obliterates limescale fast, it's safe on stainless steel, and it's delicate on parts like silicone and rubber. It's odourless, plant-based and antimicrobial, no fumes, no mess. And there's the original Ceres Deep Fryer Cleaner, non-caustic formula that removes stubborn, carbon, grease and that sticky, icky polymerization. It extends your fryer life, improves oil quality and restores performance. And then there is our Ceres Heavy Duty Degreaser, professional strength, non-toxic and non-caustic, cuts through the toughest grease. It's perfect for commercial kitchens, fish and chip shops, food production environments. Zero gimmicks, maximum results. Grab yours at ceres.shop with free next day mainland UK delivery. We also ship to Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland and all the British Isles. Also, take a moment to jump over to Ceres blog. We have some fantastic new articles going up from our writers. Mark Petru has just recently published a brilliant piece on his experience and thoughts about new fish and chip awards. I have written about the state of play in the fast food industry and how to make sure you don't fall out of favour with your customers. And that's just 2 of 10 great articles that we've uploaded this week alone. So don't miss out. Head over to ceres.blog and have a read. Finally, make sure you're signed up to the Ceres mailing list for exclusive offers, competitions and early access to the Black Friday deals. No spam, just useful updates for your business. All right, now let's jump into today's conversation with Andrew Griffith. Andrew, thank you for joining me today. Welcome to the Ceres podcast.
Oh, my great pleasure to be here, Stelios. It's good to talk to you, and thank you to all of your listeners for what they do. Provide a really valuable service, I know, for their local communities.
Oh, they always do. They do massively. And, you know, when I asked you on a few weeks ago, my colleague reached out and I genuinely thought it was going to be too busy. And it was actually very much like, no, let's do this thing. So much so that, you know, you sort of probably don't prepare for the whole thing. And actually, but these are things that we talk about every day. And we supply a lot of small businesses across the country and some larger businesses. And I thought, you know what, it'd be really good to sort of have a chat with somebody who is involved. So yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for everything that you do.
Business is my passion. So I don't know if you know, but although I am now a politician, I'm a member of Parliament. I am the shadow business secretary, which means I'm responsible for all business policy for the Conservatives, hopefully the next government. Actually, most of my life was in business. I wasn't a founder. It wasn't a really small business, to be fair. But it was Sky, which was a big business that grew. Well, it started small and grew a lot while I was there. I was there 20 years. And then I was on the board of Just Eat. So I know a little bit about the sector, but most of all, I know just how blooming hard it can be with all the red tape. You know, politicians of all parties that don't necessarily understand business, fewer of them have a business background. That's why I thought, you know, I would go and do this to try and get more of a business voice in Westminster. So this is my passion. This is not a hardship being with you today, Stephen.
How do you think that time in the corporate world has sort of shaped your views on how government should support business?
Well, the law that we pass, right? We're lawmakers, right, in Parliament most of the time when they're not taxing people. But the law that we pass the most often, I observe, is the law of unintended consequences, right? So someone says something, or maybe something happens. Everyone says someone must do something about it. But by the time it gets handed down into a law with some blooming regulator, you know, it ends up messing up lots and lots of people's lives. It's a big cost when you're a small business. The most, you know, your discretionary time, I'm always very conscious of this, is sort of on a Sunday afternoon, right? That's when you'll do the shifts for the next week. You might do your VAT return. You know, there's a precious opportunity cost for small businesses. They're not like the big ones where they've got an HR department or lots of lawyers on the staff. And so I always just felt that very consciously, that if you want to support businesses, the best thing you can do is recognise that a lot of the changes, the laws, the taxes, just all make life really hard. And it's hard anyway, you know, keeping customers happy. You don't succeed in life. You don't get a sustainable business unless you've got happy customers.
Yeah, I think many of the small businesses that I talk to, they feel like government probably don't get them. They get big business. They listen to the lobbyists from big business. You know, like you said, they've got HR departments, PR departments, all these different departments. Everything can be quite clinical and processed. They've got economies of scale. But when it comes to small business, you know, they probably feel like things are getting harder, there's more red tape, and they're being taxed to the hilt. What's your thought process there?
A couple of things we can all do about it. So first of all, invite your MP, whoever he or she is, to spend some time with you as a small business, right? If they say no, that's up to them. They've sort of voted with their feet. But a lot of them will say yes, and it helps bring to life people who may literally have spent all their life in Westminster. It brings to life the hard things that small businesses have to deal with. So that's definitely something worth doing. I love, you know, we all have districts, like we've all got constituencies, and mine is full of small businesses. So when I think about business policy, and obviously that's part of my job as a party, I think about someone who's got a couple of restaurants, right? I won't name them, it'll embarrass them. But, you know, if I go down Midhurst High Street in my district, it's full of independent stores, people with a restaurant, there's a like guy who's got the bakery, you know, and so that is the real life. It's where the rubber hits the road. And it is a lot of the difficult things about, you know, how do they get people to work? How do they keep them? How do they deal with the VAT return at the end of the quarter? You know, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I think I read this morning that the Lib Dems asking government to drop VAT by 5% to 15%. And that's an acknowledgement, I guess, if it's acknowledged by government, that the hospitality sector does need support. VAT is something that has always bothered fish and chip shop owners, restaurant owners, you name it. What's your thoughts on the VAT rate and how it could be applied to be fairer?
Look, I think first of all, the hospitality sector is really important, and it is different, right? I had my first job in hospitality. A lot of people get that experience. You know, the shape of the way those businesses are constructed, it's often very much about the people, right? You can't be have a hospitality business unless you've got front of house people in the back, chefs, all the rest of it. I was in a pub in my constituency the other day, and it's amazing how many people a small pub actually employs. In that case, it was 27 people for one pub's shift spread out about across the week. And secondly, so that's the first thing, sort of different from some other businesses. Secondly, they make a real contribution to the local community, which is not to say others don't, but there's a physicality about that. There are places where people who might be a bit lonely can go, where people can go and get warm, have a warm welcome. Often people will just meet friends or even a social group or something in the pub or restaurant. So they're putting a lot back to the community, even aside from any sort of, what people would call classically an economic contribution. And so that does and should lead us all to say, how are we going to make that better? Because it's been tough, and I speak in particular to a lot of pubs, who've been closing down in record numbers. The first thing is you stop digging, right? And I'm not overly partisan, but the way that the Chancellor came up with that national insurance, jobs tax, and changing the threshold, I thought just completely belied a lack of business experience, right? Something that apparently she did on a whimsy, on a Sunday afternoon, because she wanted to find a few extra £1 billion, makes a huge difference if you're employing someone on a 20-hour a week shift and the national insurance threshold drops from 9,100 to 5,000. So I wouldn't have done that personally. Business rates is a big issue for many, and the Conservative Party, one of our ways of helping the hospitality industry, if you like, is to say we're going to take 250,000 businesses, those that are in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector, that pay business rates today, but used to get a 75% relief when we were in government. When we get back, we will scrap that entirely, because I personally hate business rates. They are a tax before you've got a single pound of turnover, right? We all understand that we have to pay our share and whatever stuff people talk about. But the idea you've got this big fixed cost that you're paying to the local authority, not normally for very much in return. Most of them won't even collect your commercial waste these days. But you're having to pay that on the very first day of the year. And then there is a debate, and I'm not concluding that debate right here and now, but I am conscious that in other European countries, hospitality pays a significantly lower amount of VAT, rate of VAT, and that is an exception. And also that they're in competition with supermarkets. So you've got these quite arbitrary rules about what's hot food and cold food, and you get some quite thorny issues along that way. So I would just say I've got a pretty open mind. Obviously you have to get the sums right as well.
Yeah.
Everyone understands that.
So one of the things I've seen, my family's from Cyprus. I was there last week, and I had to go help my parent with something. And one thing I noticed that everything at the supermarket till is VAT rated at roughly 10 to 12%. And that's something we don't really see in the UK. And I do wonder I just wonder, a lot of people when they say, I wish hospitality was VAT rated at 12%, I'm just picking a number for the argument's sake, just like Europe. But actually, I think people that don't really visit restaurants that much or see restaurants or hospitality as a treat, they probably see, well, I don't want to pay 10% on my everyday food shop either. And you're right, the maths do matter. So I think it'd be interesting to see a solution to the problem, because like you say, how do you balance all the bucks when you need to still collect X, but everybody wants something else?
I'm a massive fan. From first principles, I'm a massive fan of simple, right? Keep it simple, stupid. That always worked well for me. And it takes away that issue about the time and the complexity. We have one of the most complex tax systems in the UK of any country in the world. Sometimes, it's the higher rate, sometimes it's lower, but it's very, very complicated. And your point about VAT, we have all these different rates, actually. A lot of people say, well, hang on, it's just 20% or whatever. But that's not quite true. There are lots of different rates, and therefore often the same thing. You can buy sausage meat from the supermarket in the chiller cabinet. It's one rate. If you go and have the same sausage, it's turned into a sausage roll and it's warm, it's a different rate. There's famous law cases about what's a cake and what's a biscuit, that sort of thing. So there's someone that you're too young to remember, but Nigel Lawson. He was a Conservative Chancellor in the past, and one of his great contributions was to try and simplify the tax system. That must have been at least 30 years ago. It's time to go back and do that again.
Do you think that sometimes government, or it doesn't matter which government, actually, just all sort of whoever's in government, do you think they don't like making those sort of meaty changes to the tax code or the VAT system, because there's actually not a lot of winners? The winner is probably, some business, admin, simplified taxes, but then you probably end up peeing off more people than you do pleasing. So then they think, well, you know what, there's no effort that the reward versus the effort isn't worth doing.
Look, there's a bit of that, but that's about leadership, frankly. Making difficult decisions. You shouldn't be on the pitch if you're not willing to make difficult decisions in politics, because it ain't easy, and people will understand that. But I think, if I'm truthful, the real issue is the lack of a plan. And in opposition now, we've got 3 years, maybe ideally less, but let's assume it's 3 years. And if we use that time well to actually have a plan, rather than rocking up and suddenly, you're in the moment, you've got all sorts of things going on, you've got a war somewhere, you've got people shouting for attention. And that's when doing the hard yards of saying, well, we're going to simplify the tax system, just gets pushed down people's to-do list. So my view a little bit is you've got a now modern government, which is big and complicated. If you want to make some changes, you've got to use your time in opposition to have a proper set of plans, and then you can go in and do them if the British people vote for you.
Yeah. I think one of the other conversations that I've had recently about VAT, it was actually this morning in preparation for this, they said, well, it was fine over COVID when it was 5% and 12.5%. And again, I think one of the main things that I'd probably like to draw out of that is, like, what was your opinion of it at the time in COVID? Did you see it as something to stimulate business or to keep business in business?
In truth, it was a fire hose, right? People hadn't thought through. There wasn't really a global pandemic plan. The shutdown was very draconian. Wasn't always, logical. You could do some things. You couldn't have a wedding, but you could have a funeral, something. So, but that was in a state of a near-term emergency, and it was ruinously expensive. That is a hard truth. Not everyone likes being being reminded of that. There were some people who missed out. The self-employed, that was difficult. People who'd only recently incorporated a business, didn't have a trading record, that was difficult. So I know some of your listeners will be saying, Jesus, it wasn't great for me. But it actually was a bit of a fire hose that just tried to put the fire out across the whole economy in an emergency. But we also know it cost a lot of money, and it wasn't sustainable to keep doing it at that level. So I get that people say, well, you did it then in COVID. Why can't we just do that all the time?
Yeah.
Right. The truth is, any government does not have that sort of money. And by the way, it's not government money. It's our money. It's taxpayers. So, what you lose in VAT, they'll probably come after you on your business, the business inheritance tax, which we have promised to scrap, the family business death tax, or your income tax or whatever.
Do you think to some degree Rishi Sunak's been vindicated to some degree? Because I remember during the election, he was saying, a lot of the spending went on COVID, and the other side were laughing at him, saying, oh, yeah, here we go again. I'm paraphrasing. It wasn't exactly that. But, do you think now, looking back, I think the other side probably see that they probably shouldn't have been encouraging more spending during COVID, because they were?
Yeah, they were. And look, politics is a contested domain, right? So, I don't like people doing things for the sake of doing things, right? I don't oppose this government for the sake of it. If they do something well, that'd be fantastic. I would applaud them. Look, he's definitely been vindicated in the election, and there's all sorts of clips now doing the rounds where he said, they will put up taxes as sure as night follows day, and that's exactly what they've done. It looks like, we're talking before the budget, a couple of weeks' time, it looks like they're going to put up taxes again in the budget. Why? Again, your listeners will recognise, well, they keep putting money into the public sector, But the economy is based on the efforts of people in the private sector, people who do get up, set the alarm clock, go to work in the morning, try and employ staff, take risk, go from one restaurant to two or one outlet to two. That's how an economy actually grows. And so, look, I think there is that bit of vindication, but we are where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Every day, the government could make things a little bit better or a little bit worse. And the great sadness, I think, is they're making it a little bit worse every day. We've got these family business death tax. I think that's just immoral. Frankly, people have worked all their life. They want to pass something on to their children. The business doesn't have a huge amount of cash within it to be taxed, and it's all after tax anyway. There's this thing called the Employment Rights Bill. I call it the Unemployment Bill, but it's going to make the experience, and I've hired and had to fire people, but it's going to make the experience of employing someone just horrendous, with all sorts of day one rights. And we've had a decent balance. No one's against workers' rights, of course, but we've had a decent balance for about 30 years. Blair didn't change it. Brown didn't change it. The Lib Dem coalition with the Conservatives didn't change it. All of a sudden, we've got this really quite doctrinaire, approach to just coshing employers, and they're the ones that give people a job.
Yeah, I'd say I had an experience with that, and I had an employee that was with me for 3 days, and I acted quite fast to, he wasn't right for the business, and I acted quite fast to have him gone, all above board. But from what I'm reading, these new employment rights would stop me from doing that, and that scares me because, that can be a huge cost to the business. And whereas, a few months to just, anyone can act for a few months, and that for the employer, an employer can too, by the way. Like, I'm not trying to make it all about the employee. And I think that we are heavily weighted at the moment towards it being very pro-employee, and I think that could cause trouble for business.
I think this is the thing I worry the most, actually, because we're already seeing a lot of businesses just suspend hiring for a number of reasons, including that. But it's just horrible. And again, I don't think business wake up in the morning trying to do the wrong thing, right? There may be some people with particular political dogma that believe that. I don't believe that at all. I believe people are good. People are trying to do the right thing. And of course, we know in any human relationship, things don't always work out. Right. I mean, particularly hiring, what have you actually done when you hire someone? You've had a look at them. You've maybe given a quick interview in the back of the shop. You've looked at their resume, maybe taken references, but pretty small. Right. So there's no substitute for actually getting someone in and seeing how it all works. This new employment rights thing could see that employee turn up in the morning, have the hump, and go to an employment tribunal or file a claim at the employment tribunal that afternoon. And by the way, cleverer people than me tell me you can now go to these AI, engines online and ask it to write the employment tribunal claim against your employer for you. As an employer, as a business, your lawyer is going to tell you to settle that claim, probably for £10,000. This is someone who's done not a day's work for you, but there's a 2-year wait for the employment tribunal when you either have to keep them on the payroll. If you're a small business, again, you can't carry someone in a team of 5 or 6 people.
Yeah, and this is the thing with small business. It isn't like, a company like Virgin Media or Sky, which will have departments, hundreds and hundreds of departments of hundreds and hundreds of people and dedicated HR. This will be, a family business which are thinking, oh my God, I've got 19 million things to do today and I don't know how to do HR,
Correct.
So, and I think that's what makes me worry about these sort of, they do feel a bit draconian. It feels like, it just feels a bit top heavy. One thing, again, on just one more topic on the sort of VAT side, not the VAT rate though, but the VAT threshold. Successive governments, not just yours, lots of them, have just never managed to get their head around. Do we lower it? Do we reduce it? The VAT threshold seems to be there for smaller traders. If you're doing like a bit of Sunday trading, let's say, or eBay selling, so you don't have to be VAT registered. But that obviously, what happens is some businesses get near to that 90,000 figure and think, you know what, I'm going to close today. I don't want to go over that 90,000 figure. So in some arguments say it should be dramatically reduced so that everyone then starts collecting VAT and passing it on. And then others are saying, no, it needs to be a lot higher, so less businesses. Where do you sort of sit? Because you seem to know a little thing or two about this. So where's your thoughts on this?
So we don't have a fully baked policy on it, and you've very articulately sort of laid out the debate. And I get from both businesses on both sides, because obviously if your competitor's not having to charge VAT and you're not particularly happy about that either. One of the things I worry about is people starting a business right at the beginning, Stelios. So, I want to be on the side of entrepreneurs, exactly as you say. There's a lot of brilliant young people. I pick on the young, but there's a lot of brilliant young people in this country who've got a side hustle, who like the idea of, having their own business, controlling their own life choices. But it's really hard. It's harder. I mean, in some ways it's easier. It's easier to find your market now with the internet. It's easier to market and, set up something. But on other levels, it's really hard. So it's so hard to open a bank account. They basically treat you as guilty until proven innocent. And I do worry if, for those that say, let's reduce the VAT threshold to 0, let's just make it nice and straight from your very first pound of turnover. I just think that's going to deter quite a lot of young people from, starting, turning their side hustle into their main hustle. It's hard to find, it's not that hard to register a company's house. It's getting a little bit harder with the new ID checks. It's blooming hard to deal with HMRC. And it's quite hard to open a bank account and all the other bits. So that's to me the trade-off. And I guess that to me says, let's not reduce that too much. I think the threshold in the UK is not that dissimilar to other countries in Europe. So a lot of people have the same sort of thing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think that for me, I don't understand how, and I can't get my head around it as much, but I don't understand how technology hasn't maybe made this bit easier. So if it is a side gig, maybe there's some sort of technology that, we've got automatic account systems now and zero and such. There must be something that we can implement to say, you know what, this is just something they're doing on the side. It's a weekend job. It's not going to be more than £14,000 a year turnover. Let them carry on. And then if they do, but I do think you're always going to have that leap where you get to a hard number and people are like, is this now worth it? Or do you just say, it's not so much financial, but it's more so what product it is they're selling. So if they're selling used DVD players, just let them carry on. It's VAT free. But if they're selling fish and chips or hot food, regardless of what figure they do, it's got to have VAT on it from day one. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, a lot of it, we're not going to answer it, but a lot of this goes back to, this tangled web we weave with all of these different taxes. And again, there's a case at a certain level of business, certain level of turnover, of trying to really brutally simplify. Everyone's got to do accounts, for example. You can obviously pay your tax now on the basis of accounts rather than having to do a separate tax comp. That seems to me sensible. Making tax digital seems to me create a lot of blooming pain for people. But then you think about what Xero's done for payroll, Sage Books, QuickTax, what Intuit, the MailChimp and others have done for being able to email your customers and manage your CRM. You're absolutely right. There should be a way of being able to have a simpler experience dealing with a tax man.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be great if they do, but I think we're way off that, to be honest.
You've got to value it. I mean, it does start with your values, right? Yeah. If you really value small business, you spend time with small business, then you're more likely to get to a sort of decent system than if you don't. You don't spend any time with business, you don't really understand what makes them tick, and you definitely don't understand what the horror show of the sheaf of different papers from HMRC look like. We've all got them in the sort of back office, haven't we? Those piles, one from corporation tax, one from VAT, one from the local council.
Yeah. No, we make a joke of the HMRC letters because they always say, oh, you're late paying something. And then I'll ring them, I'll panic. and Ryan's my financial guy, and I'll ring Ryan. I say, Ryan, what you playing at? It's late, and he's like, no, they're always late. Their letters are always behind. He goes and he shows me all the statements. We're ahead, and I'm like, okay, as long as we're ahead, I don't mind. But I can guess how some people would panic though when you get a brown letter and you think, oh my god, what am I doing here?
And it's not symmetrical. I mean, I've changed this. Right? One of my plans, this is our party policy, is that every time you deal with HMRC, you will get to rate them. Right, like a FIFO or a Checker Trade or whatever, you will. So no one's going to love them, right? Let's not be naive. People aren't going to love HMRC, but you can rate them on: did they answer the phone on time? Did they sound like they knew what they were talking about? Did you get the advice you wanted? Because, I'm not a fan of the way they operate at the moment. They are literally the people that try to turn off their phone lines for 6 months of the year.
Yeah,
they try and push everything to an app. But again, you're dealing with people whose time is their precious resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And and when your hard-earned business is on the line, you want access quite fast, don't you? You mentioned town centres and business rates. A thought process I've had, and it just makes me think: is the traditional high street dead in the water? And just bear with me for a second to play that one out. We've got all these out-of-town shopping centres that have opened, big Tesco's with all these restaurants nearby. Everybody's going there. They're not so much indoor malls. We've got lots of those too. Are we flogging a dead horse trying to say we'll give free business rates to restaurants and so on in the high street? Or is it the right thing? Do we need to reinvigorate the high street and make it fit for purpose for what it should be?
Definitely the second, right? People love their high streets. There's a utilitarian thing in going to a supermarket and loading up, but people love and have passion for the high street. It's where they spend time. We are getting older as a society. When you're old, you can't necessarily drive. Bus services, if you represent a rural area like mine, can be a bit of a joke, if we're honest, in terms of ability to go shopping. I've got literally some villages that have a bus in one direction one day and it comes back the next. That is no basis for your weekly supermarket shop. And we love our communities. If we want to find homes and places for people to live, all the evidence is they want the heart of a community with a diverse set of experiences. So what do we do about it? Right, we've generally, as a society, overtaxed the high street. Right, the tax authorities find it easy to tax property. It's harder to tax than mobile things. Parking, I hate the idea that councils use parking as a revenue raiser. Right, and they do, and it happens in my patch. So they're literally pushing people out of the high street. The big supermarkets have free parking. Shopping malls have usually free parking, and yet someone tries to stop and do the right thing and park for 90 minutes or, goes shopping and then wants to have a coffee, meet friends. Suddenly they're paying for their local car parking. The machines are fiddly. You can't always use cash. Very rarely these days can you use cash. And again, I just think people haven't really thought about the experience of how do you make a brilliant experience in the high street. Right, it's got to be safe. You've got to crack down on street crime. Can't have shoplifting. Again, big supermarkets, it's fine. They've got all the sort of security protective barriers. If you're a small shop, you just can't afford that someone comes in, steamrolls, and takes some of your goods away. So we need a proper high streets plan. We will have a high streets plan. We've already got the bones of that with our promise to scrap business rates for most high street businesses. We've talked about what the Conservatives will do to crack down on shoplifting. That's about more police, but also tougher sentences. And then we need to round that out with a proper plan for our high streets. Definitely not give up on those. Fight for our high streets.
I think I had a while back a really knowledgeable chap on business rates. His name's Andrew Webber. He's head of ratings at Colliers. And he said one of the main problems with the business rate system today is that so many people don't pay. I'm thinking off the top of my head, but I think it's 1/3 of companies don't pay business rates, which means that that 1/3 is shuffled onto the other 2/3. And he was saying, well, actually, and I'm paraphrasing to some degree, but if we went back to the beginning, he said, and everybody paid business rates, every company, then it could be lower. And that he was saying that's probably fairer and more egalitarian. Whereas now, like I said, some people just don't pay. In Scotland, like there's 9 different reasons to not pay business rates. And I was thinking to myself, like, it starts to become a bit of a pain. Like, and then obviously bigger companies, and I know we always take aim at bigger companies, like, you know, Amazon for argument's sake. And everyone says they should pay more business rates. And I guess there's an argument for that. But I do think, would it be fairer if everybody paid it, but it was just lower?
Well, the bit that would be clearly better, self-evidently, if business rates weren't being used to milk businesses, right? I mean, if like me, you believe that, you know, you only have an economy. Remember, the economy's not growing, right? The biggest challenge we face as a society is blooming economic growth. And it's only business, individuals and businesses that are actually contributing positively to economic growth in our country. So yes, everyone will always have a slightly different view. Depending on the size of their business, they'll always think everyone else except them should pay a bit more and they should pay a bit less. I get that. The overall issue is we're charging too much on business rates, too many fat cats in town halls, you know, with their fat cat pensions, not taking any risk like small business men and women are coining it in, and they're just soaking businesses and using business rates as a way of getting their revenue. You know, they should have the courage of their convictions and go to households and individuals, but they don't like doing that because they vote. So it's much easier to go and attack business and put up business rates. I'm not, by the way, saying that was all on this government. Clear, I'm not being overly partisan about any of this. But if that's what you believe, you've got to make it a little bit better, not a little bit worse. So that's where I would be. I'm slightly fed up of this sort of, you know, it's like one of those kids' party balloons, right? You squeeze one bit and the other bit comes out. So, you know, you give the small businesses business rates relief, and then the bigger businesses kick off. People like Collier's say, well, that's not fair on us. The overall issue is we're just overtaxing business. And funnily enough, we've got an economy where business isn't hiring. Business confidence is at a record low post the pandemic, and we're not growing as an economy. Well, and just to be clear, I mean, because everyone will say that. I mean, the way you fund that is you've got to have welfare reform. Right. The welfare bill is out of control. People will know, people on their street who are on welfare, they've been on welfare for too long. They're not necessarily actively looking for a job, but there's something that they could do out there. So you've got to just be honest with people, say too much tax, too much burden on the private sector part of the economy that's growing. And yes, we're going to have some hard decisions. There will be people who scream and shout, but we're going to have some hard decisions on welfare reform to pay for that.
Yeah. And just to be clear, Andrew Webber wasn't moaning about ratings for them. They're a property agency, and he was just talking about it more broadly. But, you know, honesty with the voter seems to be the hard thing. And I think we saw it over Brexit. Everything now in today's world just becomes so angry and toxic from whatever side someone's on. The media supercharges it from every angle that they're on. And obviously the news is more accessible today than it's ever been. If you think when you were at university, you had to go buy a physical newspaper. Nowadays, everyone's got it at their fingertip, but they're outraged in the morning before they've had their cornflakes, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, and I'm very humble, and I'm of that generation where I've seen both sides of it. Right, I was born analog, and you know, got my first mobile phone just after uni and all that sort of stuff. So unlike the ones that are digital natives, I could see both sides. Look, I think everyone who's involved in communication has to find where the opportunities are. So I don't know all the answers. But, you know, this is a great format, for example, right? We're having a sensible conversation. You're not interrupting me after 90 seconds to try and move on to the next soundbite so you can clip it up on YouTube or the BBC website or whatever. So, you know, we'll find, I think as a society, we will find forms to do that. We in politics have to be brave, right? I don't think anyone has really said, I say it now a lot, but I don't think anyone has really said that the government has not balanced its books, you know, year on year for 25 years, right? Fact, right? Each year they pretend, you know, Rachel Reeves will be saying, you know, and I've presented a balanced budget. No, she hasn't. She's just presented a budget in which the deficit, arguably doesn't grow as fast as it did, right? But if we were companies, we'd be shut down tomorrow, right? Our auditors wouldn't sign off our books because they'd say, show me how you're going to balance this over time. So I think it starts with a bit more honesty about the state we are in. Then you can have, hopefully, a sensible discussion. But then you have to be a bit brave and say, look, this is the right thing to do. And maybe it's not the world's most popular thing, but we've got to do it.
I see. I was reading something earlier about something else completely, but it's something that hit home, and it said the diagnosis is easy to find. It's the action of correcting it that we always struggle with. And I think that's because the minute we find the problem, what it may be, we then attempt to fix, and then everyone screams from wherever angle they're at. And I follow a lot of hospitality people on Twitter, or X as it's called now, and they're all screaming at whoever politicians there, saying something, we need a VAT cut, we need this, we need that. But then if you flip yourself out and look at other sectors, they're all doing the same, whether it's Waste Association, another association, such and such association. And I think, how do you handle an economy when everybody is screaming constantly at we need support?
I mean, look, data is your friend. Maybe that's just me as someone from business talking about that. But it was very powerful when a group called UK Hospitality, they're just one of many different groups, but when they came out with some research that showed the national insurance changes had cost 89,000 jobs, that was quite a clear fact. It's been used and cited a lot in Parliament, which is better than just the screaming and shouting.
Yeah.
And there's lots of other examples of that as well. I've been dealing with something called, terrible thing, this thing called extended producer responsibility. It's about your waste, packaging tax or whatever. And again, it was when someone, I think this is true, but it was what someone else said to me. It was someone said, look, the rate that we're being charged for aluminium waste is 10 times more than the one in Belgium. Right now, that's a fact. Hopefully it's a fact. Again, that then brings it home to you.
Yeah.
Another one, the cost of energy, industrial energy in the UK, 4 times higher than it is in the US, 2 or 3 times higher than it is in continental Europe. So the facts are just pretty helpful about providing the context.
I think now you mention as well, looking at other countries. I was in Cyprus the other week, and I'm there a lot, and I've got friends from Spain and some friends from France. Maybe not so much France, actually, because they're quite labour expensive and they protect labour and workers' rights and so on. But, in Cyprus, for example, they've essentially got 2 minimum wages. They've got minimum wage for citizens and minimum wage for imported staff, whereas the UK has gone the complete opposite to that. So obviously now I think to bring someone over on a worker's visa, they've got to be earning over 30 to 40,000 a year. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's probably 40. Yeah. And whereas, in Cyprus, and especially southern Europe, you could probably have someone legally from a foreign country earning 400-500 euros a month, and they work pretty horrendous hours. And I think a lot of people say, well, food's, when you eat out in Cyprus, it's cheaper, isn't it? It must be the VAT. And I'm like, I don't think it's just the VAT. It's the fact that they've got half their staff working at 400-500 euros a month. And I think that's something that the UK, rightly so, protects and doesn't do. But that also does have an on cost.
Yeah. And look, politicians don't like talking about the national minimum wage, right? But that is a real thing, and it's a particularly big thing in hospitality. If, as a politician, every year you just wake up one morning, want a cheap headline, and say, I know, we're going to put everyone's wages up by 6 or 7%. And as the current lot are doing, if they're between 18 and 21, we're going to put it up by nearly 12%. They get their 1 minute hit. Oh, isn't it lovely? I'm, lovely and cuddly. Look what I'm doing. They don't realise the number of people they're putting out of job. They're pricing out of work. And that process that hits every small business across the country, because that is the law, is really burdensome.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying the Conservative Party is going to scrap all of that, but I recognise that there is a burden, and that if you're setting those national wages, you've got to be in my view, a lot more understanding of what that will mean to small businesses in particular.
And I think a lot of people in business, whether it's small, medium or large, really despise the fact that whoever's in power celebrates the uplifting of minimum wage like it's a gift from government, whereas actually it's business that processes that. And and also the consumer spend in the end, because it filters all the way down. Moving on slightly to trade and supply, especially supply chain. If we just look at fish and chips for argument's sake for a moment, it's deeply tied to imports. Fish from Ireland, Norway, Faroe Islands, potatoes grown in Britain, but seed from Netherlands and so on, Belgium, oils from Europe, Ukraine, and so on. You were pro-Brexit. Not that it matters, but do you think that the Brexit policy or the negotiations just weren't thoroughly done? Because it feels like, especially, I know that the Russia-Ukraine war has thrown a big sort of a big spanner in the works, and then COVID did as well at the time. But do you think that maybe we could have done better when it comes to the Brexit negotiations?
Look, I regret that it has resulted in these frictions, right? I don't think it's in any way controversial for a country the size of the UK, a G7 economy with our 1,000-year history of democracy in one form or another, to say that we should make our own rules and laws, right? And it'll have pros and cons, and often, as you said earlier, the people with the cons shout loudest, and getting back control of our own country and things will have benefits over time. Now, I wasn't a member of Parliament during Brexit. I was actually doing business across Europe, Germany, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, lots of different countries I was actually doing business in. The bit that I am most pained about is the sort of politics of it. Right, and was that foreseeable or what? I don't know, but we've got stupid stuff like the French, constantly within the European Commission, agitate against things like pet passports. Right, we don't have blooming rabies in this country. Right, our vet system is better than any system in Europe, I'll humbly say. So why would it be that the EU Commission is saying you can't, move pets across the border as easily as you did before? There are lots of examples of that. Pilot licenses. The European Union recognises the Federal Aviation Authority of the US. The Federal Aviation Authority of the US recognises the UK Civil Aviation Authority. So they all think that the other parts of that triangle all think they're an equilateral triangle, but will the European Union recognise the UK CAA, even though we wrote the European rulebook when we were there? No. And that is just petty politics. So I'm not actually particularly interested in who's to blame. How do we fix it? I'd kind of hope that a new generation of French politicians, it's sort of, the French, took this very badly, right? They were doing pretty well out of Europe, and they don't want anyone to leave. And so my honest hope is a new generation of French politicians, move on, Barnier, Delors, all of that lot, take that emotion out. In the UK side, people have moved on as well, right? If you blame Boris Johnson or Michael Gove, or they've all retired from active politics, hopefully, you could get sensible people on both sides to say we're not going to rejoin, we're not going to hardwire our rules together because we're a sovereign country, but let's not put in place these stupid frictions where they're not necessary for a particular purpose.
Yeah, I don't know too much because obviously I wasn't around when. Well, at least I wasn't politically active when we joined the EU at that level. But if I'm right, I was listening to a BBC podcast and they were saying that the French really didn't want the UK entering the European Union at the time. And then they don't want you to leave. It feels like you can never make them happy anyway. They just want what they want.
Yeah, and well, again, to me, it's not about history lesson because it is, it's here and now. And if there's stuff that we can do, I don't want to go back to open borders. That has all sorts of impact in other parts of our life, the level of crime, how hard it is to get a house, all these other things. So I don't support open borders again. But there's plenty. If you don't ever let trade get in the way, right? Even you'll know, if you've got a background in Cyprus, I'm not making any assumptions, but Greece and Turkey managed to do just plenty of trade, right? There's quite important things they disagree about, but they don't let that get in the way of business.
Yeah.
And that's very much what I would like to see, with any sort of European deal or reset, is we just try and work to remove those frictions.
Yeah. When you was at Just Eat, did you ever see at the time, I know you was in a different role and quite high up looking at a different a viewpoint, but did you ever sort of see the problem with the gig economy, and especially now what we see a lot of illegal staffing and working practices in that economy, and do you sort of see a solution to that?
I didn't see it then. I think for two reasons. The business was sort of growing, so it wasn't the same level of scale, and I think most of the current level of non-EU immigration and the illegality wasn't there. It just the numbers weren't there. It was before that happened. I left in 2019, and that was before I think there'd been a single small boat.
Yeah.
So it's a much more recent phenomena. There were debates about the gig economy, and it was Uber at the time that people were talking about in that context. My basic view is, look, there will, I'm afraid, in any human system, there will always be some failures. And people aren't always very comfortable with that, and they don't always want to say that. But if you've got a big, complicated human system, someone somewhere will try and game it. One day something will go wrong. Even in the most public sector bodies, the BBC, right? We see that things go wrong. So a lot of people's prejudice or attacks, as it were, on the gig economy were looking at maybe the 1% rather than the 99%. So 99% of people were looking and saying, look, I'm ordering my affairs and, I'll either be self-employed or whatever. And then something goes wrong, often in a new domain, right? Uber was quite new in those days. And there's always some vested interests as well who just don't love change. So I guess that's just a long way of saying I take a fairly balanced approach to it. I do not want everybody to be forced down a narrow tram lines of one type of employment contract. I genuinely don't. I support 0 hours. I don't want anyone to be exploited, but 0 hours can be a really good solution for someone who's juggling care responsibilities for elderly people who doesn't feel I can always commit to a shift because I might have to go and look after mum or dad or take them to hospital. It could be really good for students, that can combine it with studies, but they don't necessarily know when their exams are and that sort of thing. So to me, don't make it a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Particularly one that's got a whole bunch of bureaucracy attached to it.
You touched on it a little bit. What are your thoughts on the upcoming budget? What are your predictions, maybe?
I don't want to do too much predictions. I mean, there is a perfectly clear choice. It's just politics, I'm afraid, but it's a perfectly clear choice. Do you either cut spending, which you can do in a sensible way, not go and cut the local library, but you can reform welfare. We've got 9 million people of working age who are not currently in work. Right? It's a huge opportunity. So it's the size of not even a small country. That's the size of a medium-sized country. If you could get those adults into the workplace, you would save a lot of money on welfare, probably grow the economy a bit as well. So the choice is quite binary, right? Last year, she raised, I think, £40 billion plus in tax, spent £70 billion more that we don't actually have, and we all paid the price. So you could either go and do that again. What is it? Isn't that Einstein quote about, madness is, doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome? In my view, she would just damage the economy further, or go and get to grips with reforming the public sector. There's plenty of scope to do that. If you're looking for £40 billion, we've set out our way of doing it as Conservatives, and that way you wouldn't have to put anybody's tax up at all, and we could all go and, even Stelios, the choice of date, right? I think the choice of date belies a lack of understanding of business, because and I knew in business that was payday, the big November payday before Christmas. Right? Most people get paid on a Wednesday or a Thursday, the end of the month. That's huge for our high streets, right? I mean, every fish and chop shop owner will know which is the Friday payday. because that'll be often their busiest takings of the month, because a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck. Setting the blooming budget for that day, is a double whammy, because it's going to really, damage sentiment. I can't imagine lots of people are going to sit and watch Rachel Reeves telling them how much their tax is going up on Wednesday, and then feeling that flush that following weekend.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a tough one. And then she did say, we've done it once and we're not coming back for more. And it looks like now that was a broken promise. But maybe when they were in opposition, they maybe shouldn't have jeered and mocked as much as what they did, because now they're probably learning it's harder than they thought. But I see you see the patterns emerge. It's circular. Now you see it sometimes from the other side, and you think, well, look, it was on the other foot not so long ago. And I think, but that's just politics, I'd imagine. Like you said earlier, it's just that's just the way it is. But I
don't accept that. We've got to. I accept your description of it, but I think this is a moment. And again, a lot of your viewers will sound like a history lesson. But after a failed consensus of the 1970s, of which the Conservatives were part, then they came back under new leadership, but the same party in the 1980s under Mrs. Thatcher properly changed the economy, put a bit more pride into our country with things like the Falklands. So, politics is in flux. It will always be contested domain. Your listeners will be shouting out lots of names of other parties as well. I completely get that. But my own view, the reason I am a Conservative, or still in the Conservative Party, is I think that we can be that party of change, use our time well, make some proper plans, and then come back in and hit the ground running.
Yeah, and I often find as an outsider to politics is that it's very quick to hear all the sound bites and think, wow, that's amazing. And someone will say, oh, well, someone from a very small minor party said something that sounds so fresh and so good. And you think, well, because what hope have they got of getting in? So they can say these things that sound amazing and they will never happen. So these promises sound great because they're probably never going to have to enact it, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah. And we, I don't want to sound pious, but we won't do that because we've traditionally been a party of government. And so when we say something, it's like the point of VAT. I've obviously got a lot of empathy with some of the things we've been talking about today, but until I've got a specific plan that would pay for it, we won't say those sort of things. So, but when we do say things like cutting business rates, like scrapping the family business death tax, that is baked. We know how we will pay for it. We will do that.
So for those small businesses in hospitality that feel quite disconnected from Westminster, what could they do to sort of feel more connected and get everyone more sort of in tune with what their business is going through?
I would. So first of all, look, I wouldn't give up hope, right? I think most people in Westminster do want to do the right thing. They're not often operating on the same fact set as everyone else. So when you're frustrated and you're despondent, sit down and write an email to your MP and tell them how you feel. Tell them about your business and how the policies are making you feel. And then, I always say to people, if you had, this is a hard question, but if you had one wish or even three wishes, what would you change? People are open to ideas more so perhaps than we think. And of course, a lot of other people are writing to the same member of parliament with their ideas as to how to spend your money. So, you've got a voice. We do live in a democracy. And so politicians should, and I think by and large, do listen.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we can all do, right? If you're frustrated, disagree with me, fine. You can write me, but I'm not your MP for most of your listeners. Go write to your MP.
Yeah.
Say, I think this is terrible, and I do it. And use your own voice. You don't have to use posh terms or fancy language. Write it as you. It's great if you don't actually swear, but write it as you feel.
Yeah.
Right. We're all emotionally vested in our businesses. I miss my time in business because it was my life. It was my friends. It was where I socialised. It was when you had good days and bad days, and you shared those.
Absolutely. And what's the one question I didn't ask but probably should have asked?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of people say, at this point, a lot of people, Stelios, say to me, look, well, this is all very good, and I get you, and I think you probably do understand, what you're talking about, but are you going to win? And look, I just don't know. But it is absolutely, we live in volatile times. We, the Conservative Party, definitely lost the last election for all sorts of reasons. But we managed to take a 80-seat majority, government where we had 80 seats, more than any other party. We're the biggest party. And today, obviously, the other party, Labour, have got that huge majority. So if you're in this volatile world, it is perfectly possible. Don't write us off. It's absolutely possible that we can be the next government. This government obviously, came in, didn't have a huge positive vote. They benefited from our losing the election, as it were, and they're pretty unpopular. So it's not an advert for my party or any other. Just don't write us off, right? Maybe we will be that party, and my job is to make sure that we've got the best set of policies for small businesses that we possibly can.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Andrew, thank you for your time.
Not at all.
Yeah,
thank you.
And hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Love to, and as I'm out and about, hopefully see as many of your companies as possible. All right.
And that's a wrap with today's episode with Andrew Griffith MP. I really enjoyed this episode. It's not often you get to sit down and have an honest, business-minded conversation with someone in politics. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you tell everybody. Also, make sure you're on the Ceres mailing list. We've got some absolutely great offers coming your way, some giveaways, festive surprises, and if you're on the mailing list, you'll hear about the Black Friday deals and how to get involved before anybody else. Remember, Ceres is here to help your business thrive with great products, genuine support, and real conversations that matter. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you next time on the Ceres podcast.